The twin moons of Dracoris Prime cast an eerie glow over the crystalline cliffs where the great dragon clans made their roosts. In the highest peaks where the air grew thin and the winds howled like banshees, something unprecedented had happened. The Crimson Flame Pack, one of the most ancient and respected dragon lineages in the galaxy, had done the unthinkable. They had abandoned their young. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her environmental suit closer to her body as she climbed the treacherous path toward the abandoned nest. Behind her, 3 other members of the Interspecies Research Station followed, their breathing heavy in the thin atmosphere. The dragons had left Dracoris Prime 3 cycles ago, fleeing to the Outer Rim territories after a territorial dispute with the Golden Scale Alliance. What they left behind had shocked even the most experienced xenobiologists. "There," whispered Dr. Chen, pointing toward a massive cave opening carved into the cliff face. "The bioscanners are picking up multiple life signs." Elena's heart raced. When the initial reports came in, nobody believed them. Dragons never abandoned their offspring. It went against every known behavior pattern, every instinct encoded in their ancient DNA. Dragon hatchlings were precious beyond measure, protected fiercely by their entire pack until they reached maturity at 50 standard years. But these weren't ordinary hatchlings. As they approached the cave entrance, Elena could hear them before she saw them. Soft mewling sounds like massive cats echoed from the darkness. She activated her helmet's night vision and gasped. 3 dragon hatchlings, each the size of a terrestrial elephant, huddled together in the center of the vast cavern. Their scales gleamed like fresh snow, and their eyes glowed with an otherworldly pale blue light. "Albino," breathed Dr. Reyes, the team's geneticist. "All 3 of them." Elena approached slowly, her hands raised in the universal gesture of peace that had been established in first contact protocols decades ago. The largest hatchling, a female by the markings on her neck frills, lifted her massive head and regarded Elena with intelligent eyes that seemed far too old for her young body. "Hello there," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We're here to help." The dragon hatchling tilted her head, processing the strange sounds. Dragons were known to be incredibly intelligent, capable of learning multiple languages within their first few cycles of life. But these 3 had been abandoned before they could learn their own ancestral tongue, let alone the common galactic languages. Dr. Chen activated his recording equipment. "This is unprecedented. In 700 years of dragon galactic civilization contact, there has never been a recorded case of abandonment. The cultural implications can wait," Elena interrupted, never taking her eyes off the 3 young dragons. "Right now, these babies are starving." She was right. The hatchlings were noticeably thinner than they should be, their ribs visible beneath their pale scales. Dragons typically nursed from their mothers for the first 6 months, then gradually transitioned to hunting with the pack. These 3 had been surviving on whatever small creatures they could catch in the cave, but it wasn't nearly enough for their rapidly growing bodies. The middle hatchling, a male with slightly larger wings, crawled forward cautiously. His pale blue eyes locked onto Elena's face, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply desperation. He made a soft, chittering sound and extended his long neck toward her. "He's trying to communicate," Dr. Vasquez noted, her voice filled with wonder. "Look at the positioning of his head, the angle of his wings. It's a submission posture, but also, it's almost like he's asking for help." Elena slowly removed her gloves despite the freezing temperature. Dragon skin was incredibly sensitive to touch, and she had read reports that physical contact was crucial for their emotional development. As her bare hand made contact with the hatchling's snout, she felt the incredible heat radiating from within his body. Dragons maintained internal temperatures of nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit, an adaptation from their volcanic homeworld origins. The young dragon closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, a rumbling sound emerging from deep in his chest. The other 2 hatchlings watched intently, their pale eyes reflecting hope and wariness in equal measure. "We need to establish a care protocol immediately," Elena said, her scientific mind racing even as her heart melted at the sight of these abandoned creatures. "Dragon hatchlings require specific nutrition, socialization, and thermal regulation. Without their pack, they'll die," Dr. Chen finished grimly. "The mortality rate for isolated dragon young is nearly 100%. They're social creatures, Dr. Vasquez. They need the guidance and protection of their elders to survive. But Elena was already formulating a plan. She had spent 12 years studying dragon behavior and physiology. She knew their needs, their instincts, their complex social structures. More importantly, she understood something that the other researchers seemed to have missed. These hatchlings hadn't been abandoned because they were albino. They had been abandoned because their pack was afraid. In dragon society, albinism was considered a powerful omen. Some clans viewed it as a blessing from the ancient fire spirits. Others saw it as a curse that would bring destruction to the pack. The Crimson Flame Pack, it seemed, had chosen to err on the side of caution. Rather than risk the potential consequences of raising albino young, they had made the heartbreaking decision to leave them behind. But Elena saw something different when she looked at these three magnificent creatures. She saw intelligence, curiosity, and a desperate need for connection. She saw beings who deserved a chance to live, regardless of the color of their scales. The largest female hatchling approached now, her movements careful and deliberate. She sniffed at Elena's outstretched hand, then made a decision that would change everything. She pressed her massive head into Elena's palm and began to purr, a sound like distant thunder that vibrated through Elena's bones. "We're taking them back to the station," Elena announced, her voice firm with determination. "Elena, be reasonable," Dr. Chen protested. "The logistics alone. Dragon hatchlings require specialized care that we simply don't have the facilities for. And the legal implications. These are abandoned members of a sovereign species. We could be charged with kidnapping." But Elena was already opening her emergency supply pack, pulling out high-energy ration bars and water purification tablets. "Then we'll build the facilities. And as for the legal issues," once she looked up at her colleague with steel in her eyes. "Sometimes doing the right thing means risking everything else." As if sensing her determination, all three hatchlings moved closer, forming a protective circle around the small human who had shown them the first kindness they had known since their abandonment. In that moment, Elena Vasquez made a promise that would echo across the galaxy. No matter what it took, she would give these magnificent creatures the family they deserved. The emergency transport ship groaned under the weight of its unusual cargo as it descended through Dracoris Prime's atmosphere toward the interspecies research station. Elena sat in the cargo hold, surrounded by three increasingly agitated dragon hatchlings who had never been confined in such a small space before. The largest female, whom Elena had mentally named Frost due to her silvery white scales, pressed against Elena's side and whimpered softly. "It's okay, girl," Elena murmured, running her hand along Frost's neck ridge. "We're almost there." The male hatchling, Storm, paced restlessly in the limited space, his pale blue eyes darting between the metal walls and the strange humming sounds of the ship's engines. The smallest of the three, a delicate female Elena had named Mist, remained curled in a tight ball, trembling despite the heat radiators Elena had installed throughout the cargo hold. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the intercom. "Elena, we're getting priority communications from the Galactic Council. News of what we're doing has already reached the inner systems." Elena grimaced. She had hoped they would have more time before the bureaucrats got involved. Dragon affairs were typically handled by the Draconic Cultural Preservation Committee, a group of stuffy academics who viewed the great lizards more as living artifacts than sentient beings with individual needs. "What are they saying?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew. "They want the hatchlings transferred to the Xenological Institute on Proxima Station immediately. They're calling our actions a dangerous precedent that threatens established interspecies protocols." Storm's head snapped up at the sound of Chen's voice, and he let out a low growl that made the ship's hull vibrate. Dragons might be young, but they were incredibly sensitive to emotional undercurrents. He could sense Elena's growing distress. "Tell the council that we'll file a full report once the hatchlings are stabilized," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "These babies haven't eaten a proper meal in days. Politics can wait." As the ship settled onto the landing pad with a soft thud, Elena could see the crowd that had gathered outside the research station. Word had spread quickly through the small scientific community on Dracoris Prime. Dragon sightings were rare enough, but baby dragons were practically unheard of. Most researchers went their entire careers without seeing a hatchling up close. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's director, was waiting at the cargo bay doors with a team of engineers and medical personnel. Her expression was a mixture of excitement and deep concern. "Elena, I hope you know what you're doing," Dr. Kim said as the doors hissed open. "The council has already filed an injunction. We have 48 hours before they send an enforcement team." Elena stepped out of the cargo hold, followed immediately by Frost, who refused to leave her side. The crowd of researchers gasped as the magnificent albino dragon emerged into the natural light. Her scales seemed to glow with an inner radiance, and her pale blue eyes surveyed the gathering with regal dignity. 48 hours is enough," Elena said confidently, though internally she was calculating everything that needed to be done. "We need to establish basic care protocols, document their health status, and most importantly, prove that they can thrive under human supervision." Storm and Mist emerged from the ship more cautiously, staying close to Elena and Frost. The assembled crowd maintained a respectful distance, but Elena could see the wonder in their eyes. These weren't just rare specimens to be studied. They were magnificent creatures with distinct personalities and needs. "The habitat construction crew is already working on converting Storage Bay 7, Dr. Kim reported as they walked toward the main complex. "We've installed thermal regulators, a water feature, and reinforced the walls with titanium steel composite. It's not ideal, but it should serve as temporary quarters while we figure out a long-term solution." Elena nodded, but her attention was focused on the hatchlings' reactions to their new environment. Dragons were highly adaptable creatures, but they were also deeply territorial. Introducing them to an entirely artificial environment would require careful management. Frost suddenly stopped walking and lifted her head, sampling the air with her forked tongue. Dragons possessed incredibly sophisticated chemical sensors that allowed them to detect pheromones, environmental toxins, and even emotional states through scent. Whatever she was detecting made her neck frills flatten against her skull in a defensive posture. "What is it, girl?" Elena asked, following Frost's gaze toward a group of station personnel who had gathered near the main entrance. Among them stood Dr. Marcus Holloway, the senior xenobiologist and Elena's former mentor. His expression was unreadable, but Elena could sense his disapproval radiating like heat from a forge. Dr. Holloway was a traditionalist who believed strictly in non-interference protocols. He had probably already contacted the council to express his opposition to Elena's actions. "Elena," Dr. Holloway called out as they approached. "I need to speak with you privately." "Later, Marcus," Elena replied without stopping. "Right now, my priority is getting these hatchlings settled and fed." "Your priorities are exactly what I'm concerned about," Holloway said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "You're anthropomorphizing these creatures, Elena. Dragons are not pets. They're apex predators with complex social structures that we barely understand. What you're doing could permanently damage their natural development." Storm let out a low rumble at the harsh tone in Holloway's voice. The young dragon moved protectively in front of Elena, his pale eyes fixed on the older scientist. It was a remarkably sophisticated response for a creature that was supposedly incapable of forming meaningful bonds with humans. "What I'm doing," Elena said, turning to face her former mentor, "is saving 3 lives that would otherwise be lost. You can debate the philosophical implications later. Right now, these hatchlings need food, shelter, and care. That's not anthropomorphizing. That's basic compassion." Dr. Kim stepped between them before the argument could escalate further. "We can discuss policy later. Right now, let's focus on immediate needs." She gestured toward the converted storage bay. "The habitat is ready for inspection." As they entered the modified space, Elena was impressed by what the engineering team had accomplished in such a short time. The bay had been transformed into something resembling a natural cave system, complete with rocky ledges, a small pool of circulating water, and carefully controlled lighting that mimicked the natural day-night cycle of Dracoris Prime. The 3 hatchlings explored their new environment cautiously. Mist, the smallest, seemed particularly drawn to the water feature, dipping her snout into the pool and making pleased chittering sounds. Storm investigated the rocky ledges, testing their stability with his powerful claws. Frost, meanwhile, positioned herself near the entrance where she could monitor both her siblings and the humans who had brought them here. "It's not perfect," Dr. Kim admitted, "but it's a start. We've also prepared a feeding area with the highest grade protein synthesizers we could requisition on short notice. The nutritional profiles aren't exact matches for dragon milk, but they should suffice until we can develop something more appropriate. Elena watched as the hatchlings began to settle into their new space. Despite everything they had been through, they were displaying remarkable resilience. Dragons were survivors, she realized. They had to be, given the harsh environments they typically inhabited. "There's something else," Dr. Kim said quietly, drawing Elena aside. "I've been monitoring galactic communications networks. Word of your rescue is spreading beyond academic circles. There are news outlets on 17 different worlds running stories about the human dragon sitter. Some are calling it a heartwarming tale of interspecies cooperation. Others are calling it dangerous interference with natural selection." Elena sighed. She had hoped to keep things quiet until the hatchlings were stable, but she should have known better. In an age of instantaneous galactic communication, nothing stayed secret for long. "How long before we start getting visitors?" Elena asked. "I'd estimate 72 hours before the first news crews arrive," Dr. Kim replied. "And probably less time than that before we get official inquiries from the Draconic Cultural Preservation Committee." As if summoned by their conversation, Frost approached Elena and gently butted her massive head against the human's shoulder. The young dragon had learned quickly that this action always resulted in the comforting sensation of Elena's hand stroking her neck ridge. "Well," Elena said, reaching up to scratch behind Frost's ear frills, "I guess we'd better make the most of the time we have." Looking around at the three magnificent creatures who were already beginning to make the habitat their home, Elena felt a surge of determination. Let the politicians and bureaucrats debate. Let the news crews come with their cameras and their sensationalized stories. She had made a promise to these hatchlings, and she intended to keep it. No matter what the galaxy thought about her methods. 3 weeks had passed since the hatchlings' arrival at the research station, and Elena barely recognized the transformed creatures who greeted her each morning with enthusiastic chirps and wing fluttering. What had once been 3 malnourished, traumatized babies were now rapidly growing into magnificent young dragons with distinct personalities and an unshakable bond with their human caretaker. Frost had appointed herself as the leader of the small pack, often positioning herself between Elena and any perceived threats. She had also developed a peculiar habit of collecting shiny objects from around the station and presenting them to Elena like offerings. Yesterday, Elena had found her favorite data tablet carefully placed in Frost's sleeping alcove, apparently deemed worthy of the dragon's treasure collection. Storm had grown the most dramatically, his wingspan now nearly 12 feet across. He spent hours each day practicing his flying techniques in the enlarged habitat space, though he always landed immediately when Elena called his name. His intelligence continued to amaze the research team. He had learned to operate the automatic feeding dispensers and had somehow figured out how to adjust the habitat's temperature controls to his preference. Little Mist remained the most delicate of the three, but she had revealed a surprising talent for mimicry. She could now reproduce a dozen different sounds from around the station, including Elena's laugh, the whistle of the morning alert system, and the distinctive beep of the communication consoles. More remarkably, she had begun attempting to form actual words in Standard Galactic. Though her vocal cords weren't quite developed enough for clear speech yet, Elena stood in the habitat's observation deck, reviewing the morning's behavioral assessments on her tablet when Dr. Kim approached with a grim expression. "We have a problem," Dr. Kim announced without preamble. "The Galactic Council has fast-tracked the injunction. A team of inspectors from the Draconic Cultural Preservation Committee will arrive tomorrow, and they have authorization to remove the hatchlings immediately." Elena's tablet slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Below in the habitat, Frost's head snapped up at the sound, her sensitive hearing detecting the device's impact against the deck plating. The dragon's pale blue eyes found Elena through the observation window, and her neck frills flattened in obvious concern. "They can't do that," Elena said, though she knew it was wishful thinking. "The hatchlings are thriving here. We have documented proof of their physical and emotional development. Taking them away now would be traumatic." "The committee doesn't see it that way," Dr. Kim replied, handing Elena a formal communication pad. "According to their preliminary assessment, we're interfering with natural selection processes and creating artificial dependencies that will prevent successful reintegration into draconic society. Elena scanned the official language with growing anger. The report was filled with academic jargon and theoretical concerns, but it showed no understanding of the real breathing creatures who had formed deep emotional bonds with their human caregivers. To the committee, Storm, Frost, and Mist were specimens to be studied, not individuals with their own needs and preferences. There has to be something we can do, Elena insisted. Legal challenges, appeals to higher authorities. I've already consulted with our legal team, Dr. Kim said sadly. Galactic law is clear on this matter. Dragons are considered a protected species under the Cultural Preservation Accords. Any intervention in their natural development requires unanimous approval from both the Galactic Council and the affected Dragon Clan. Since the Crimson Flame Pack has officially disowned these hatchlings, the committee has legal guardianship by default. Elena watched Storm execute a perfect barrel roll in the habitat below, his pale scales catching the artificial sunlight like polished silver. He had been working on that maneuver for days, clearly trying to impress Elena with his aerial skills. The thought of never seeing him fly again made her chest tighten with grief. What about the hatchlings themselves? Elena asked desperately. Don't they have any say in this? Dragons don't reach legal majority until their 50th year, Dr. Kim replied. Until then, they're considered dependents under the care of their pack or appointed guardians. A soft chime from the habitat's intercom system drew their attention. Mist had activated the communication panel and was making the warbling sound that Elena had taught her meant attention. The smallest hatchling looked directly up at the observation deck and attempted her version of human speech. Elena, sad? The words were barely recognizable, distorted by Mist's alien vocal structure, but the meaning was unmistakable. The young dragon had sensed Elena's emotional distress and was trying to offer comfort in the way she had learned humans used words. Elena's heart broke a little more. In 3 weeks, these magnificent creatures had learned not just to trust humans, but to care about their emotional well-being. They had formed the kind of deep, meaningful bonds that the committee insisted were impossible between species. I'm going to fight this, Elena announced, her voice hardening with determination. There has to be precedent somewhere, some legal framework we can use. Elena, Dr. Kim began, but she was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's main control center. Director Kim, we have an incoming priority transmission from the outer system. It's a Dragon carrier ship, massive configuration. They're requesting permission to dock. Elena and Dr. Kim exchanged glances. Dragon carrier ships were rare sights in civilized space. They were typically used only for major diplomatic missions or emergency situations. The timing of this arrival, just 1 day before the committee's inspection, couldn't be coincidental. Put the transmission through to the habitat observation deck, Dr. Kim ordered. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of a dragon ship's command chamber. The space was vast and dimly lit, designed to accommodate beings who could measure their wingspan in hundreds of feet. At the center of the screen sat a massive dragon whose scales gleamed like burnished copper in the reflected light of Dracoris, Prime's twin moons. I am Elder Pyraxis of the Golden Scale. Alliance, the dragon announced, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. I come seeking audience with the human who has taken custody of the abandoned young of the Crimson Flame Pack. Elena stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. Meeting with an elder dragon was an honor accorded to very few non-dragons in galactic history. It was also terrifying. Elder dragons were among the oldest, most powerful beings in the known universe, capable of reducing entire starships to molten slag with their breath. I am Dr. Elena Vasquez, she replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. I've been caring for the 3 hatchlings since their rescue. Elder Pyraxis studied her through the screen with eyes that glowed like molten gold. Dragons possessed incredibly sophisticated abilities to read emotional states through pheromones and micro-expressions, and Elena felt as though he was peering directly into her soul. The Crimson Flame Pack has petitioned the Golden Scale Alliance for mediation in this matter, Pyraxis continued. They claim that their offspring have been corrupted by human influence and can never be successfully reintegrated into draconic society. They request that the young be disposed of as a mercy. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She had known that the Crimson Flame Pack viewed albinism as unlucky, but she hadn't realized their prejudice ran so deep. They were asking for their own children to be killed rather than allowed to live as they were. However, Paraxis continued, and Elena detected what might have been amusement in his ancient voice. There are other perspectives to consider. I have come to evaluate these young myself and determine whether they represent a threat to draconic society, or simply a new possibility. In the habitat below, all three hatchlings had gathered near the communication panel, drawn by the sound of their ancestral language being spoken. Storm's head was tilted in intense concentration, his pale eyes bright with intelligence. Elena realized that despite being abandoned so young, the hatchlings retained some instinctive recognition of draconic speech patterns. "When will you arrive, Elder?" Elena asked. "My ship will dock within the hour," Paraxis replied. "Prepare the young for inspection. Their fate will be decided before the committee arrives tomorrow." The screen went dark, leaving Elena alone with Dr. Kim and the weight of impossible responsibility. In less than an hour, she would have to present 3 young dragons to one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and somehow convince him that they deserved to live. Looking down at Storm, Frost and Mist, who were now gathered in a protective huddle near the communication panel, Elena made another silent promise. Whatever happened next, she would stand between them and anyone who tried to harm them, even if that someone was an elder dragon. After all, she had already proven that humans could do the impossible when it came to caring for abandoned dragon young. Maybe, just maybe, she could prove it again. The entire research station trembled as Elder Paraxis's massive form settled onto the reinforced landing platform. Elena watched through the main observation window as the ancient dragon folded wings that could have sheltered a small city. His copper scales gleamed like burnished metal in the afternoon light, and even from a distance, she could feel the immense power radiating from his presence. "He's magnificent," Dr. Kim breathed, her voice filled with awe. "I've seen dragons before, but never an elder. The size difference is incredible." Elena nodded, but her attention was focused on the 3 hatchlings who pressed against the habitat's transparent barriers, their pale eyes wide with wonder and instinctive recognition. Storm had positioned himself protectively in front of his sisters. His young wings spread in a display of bravado that would have been amusing if the circumstances weren't so dire. "Remember," Elena murmured to them, though she knew they couldn't understand her words in the same way humans did. "Be yourselves. Show him who you really are." A delegation of station personnel had gathered to escort Elder Paraxis to the habitat, maintaining the careful protocols that governed interactions with visiting dragons. Elena took her place at the front of the group, her hands steady despite the anxiety coursing through her veins. The doors to the main corridor hissed open, and Elder Paraxis entered with a grace that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. His massive head, easily the size of a small aircraft, turned to regard Elena with ancient golden eyes that held the wisdom of millennia. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," he rumbled, his voice causing the station's walls to vibrate sympathetically. "I have heard remarkable things about your care for the abandoned young. Tell me, what do you see when you look at them?" The question caught Elena off guard. She had expected interrogation about her methods, criticism of her interference in dragon affairs, or demands for technical data about the hatchling's development. Instead, Paraxis seemed genuinely interested in her perspective. "I see 3 individuals," Elena replied honestly, "each with their own personality, their own intelligence, their own capacity for growth and connection. I see beings who deserve a chance to become whatever they're meant to be, regardless of the circumstances of their birth." Paraxis studied her for a long moment, then turned his attention to the habitat where the hatchlings waited. Storm had begun pacing restlessly, clearly agitated by the presence of the elder dragon but unwilling to back down from his protective stance. "Show me," Paraxis commanded. Elena led the way into the habitat, acutely aware of the elder dragon's massive presence behind her. The space that had seemed spacious for the hatchling suddenly felt cramped with Paraxis filling most of the available area. His copper scales reflected the artificial lighting and complex patterns that hurt Elena's eyes to look at directly. The hatchling's reaction was immediate and profound. All 3 dropped to the floor in perfect submission postures, their pale heads pressed low and their wings spread wide in acknowledgement of Paraxis's dominance. It was pure instinct, Elena realized. The ancient genetic programming that governed dragon social hierarchy, asserting itself despite their young age and unusual upbringing. But then something unexpected happened. Frost, the largest and most protective of the three, slowly raised her head and looked directly into Paraxis's golden eyes. It was a breach of protocol so severe that Elena gasped audibly. Young dragons never made direct eye contact with an elder, unless specifically commanded to do so. Instead of reacting with anger, Paraxis tilted his massive head curiously. "Interesting," he murmured. "This one has courage. Or perhaps ignorance of proper behavior." "She's protective," Elena explained quickly, moving to stand beside Frost. "She's appointed herself as the leader of their small group. It's not disrespect, it's responsibility." Frost made a soft, chittering sound and pressed against Elena's side, her pale eyes never leaving Paraxis's face. The message was clear. She was claiming Elena as part of her pack and would defend her if necessary, even against an elder dragon. Paraxis lowered his head until he was nearly at ground level, bringing his massive eyes closer to Frost's delicate features. "You would challenge me, little pale one, for the sake of this human who cares for you?" Elena held her breath, waiting for Frost's response. The young dragon studied the elder for several heartbeats, then did something that made Elena's heart skip. She gently nudged Elena forward, positioning her between herself and Paraxis, then performed another submission posture while keeping her body protectively curved around Elena's legs. "She's not challenging you," Elena realized suddenly. "She's introducing me to you. She's presenting me as part of her pack and asking for your recognition." Paraxis's golden eyes widened slightly, the only indication of his surprise. "Remarkable," he rumbled. "In 800 years I have never witnessed a dragon claim a non-dragon as pack family. The implications are significant." Storm had been watching this exchange with growing boldness. Now he crept forward, his pale scales shimmering with nervous energy. When he reached Elena's other side, he performed his own version of the introduction ritual, gently butting his head against her hand before bowing to Paraxis. Little missed. Not to be outdone by her siblings, approached with characteristic delicacy, but instead of simply bowing, she opened her mouth and produced a sound that made everyone in the habitat freeze in amazement. "Pack friend," she said in perfectly clear Draconic, the ancient language rolling off her forked tongue as naturally as breathing. "Elena, pack friend, good." Elena stared at the smallest hatchling in shock. None of them had spoken Draconic before. They had been abandoned too young to learn the traditional language from their parents. Yet somehow, in the presence of an elder dragon, Mist had instinctively accessed genetic memories that allowed her to communicate in her ancestral tongue. Paraxis was silent for several long minutes, his ancient mind processing what he had witnessed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of formal authority that Elena had never heard before. "I invoke the right of testimony," he announced. "By the ancient laws that govern our kind, these young have spoken for themselves in their chosen pack bond. Their words carry the weight of truth." Elena felt her legs go weak with relief. The right of testimony was one of the oldest Draconic legal concepts, dating back to the earliest days of their civilization. It granted any dragon, regardless of age, the right to speak for themselves in matters of life and death. But Paraxis wasn't finished. "However," he continued, and Elena's heart sank again, "the Crimson Flame Pack has also invoked ancient law. They claim that these young have been so corrupted by human influence that they can no longer be considered true dragons. They demand trial by ordeal to prove their worthiness." "Trial by what?" Elena asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "The young must demonstrate their ability to function as proper dragons," Paraxis explained. "They must show that they possess the hunting instincts, the flight capabilities, and the fire breath that define our species. If they fail any test, they will be declared unfit for survival and removed from existence." Elena's protective instincts flared immediately. "That's not fair. They're still babies. They haven't had time to fully develop those abilities yet." "Nevertheless, it is law," Paraxis replied, though Elena thought she detected sympathy in his ancient voice. "The trials will begin at dawn tomorrow, before the Galactic Council's inspection team arrives. The entire matter will be settled by Draconic tradition rather than bureaucratic interference." As if sensing the gravity of the situation, all three hatchlings pressed closer to Elena. Storm spread his wings protectively over his sisters, while Frost positioned herself to face any potential threat. Mist, meanwhile, began making the soft crooning sounds that Elena had learned meant comfort and reassurance. "What exactly will these trials involve?" Elena asked, her scientific mind already working on potential solutions. Pyraxis studied the three young dragons with calculating eyes. 3 tests as ancient tradition demands. First, they must demonstrate hunting prowess by capturing live prey. Second, they must show mastery of flight by navigating a complex aerial course. Third, and most critically, they must prove their fire breath capability by igniting a ceremonial flame. Elena's heart sank. The hatchlings had been fed synthesized nutrition their entire lives. They had never hunted live prey. Storm was an excellent flyer, but Frost and Mist were still developing their aerial skills. And most problematically of all, none of them had developed their fire breath yet. Dragon hatchlings typically didn't manifest flame production until they were at least 6 months old, and these 3 were barely half that age. "Can I help them prepare?" Elena asked desperately. "You may observe," Pyraxis replied formally. "But the trials must be completed by the young alone. Any assistance will result in automatic failure." As the elder dragon prepared to leave, Elena knelt down and gathered all 3 hatchlings around her. They seemed to sense her distress, pressing close and making comforting sounds. In less than 12 hours, she might lose them forever. "We'll figure this out," she whispered to them. "Somehow we'll find a way." But as she looked into their pale, trusting eyes, Elena wondered if love and determination would be enough to overcome ancient laws and biological limitations. Dawn broke cold and gray over Dracoris Prime as Elena stood in the expanded testing arena that had been hastily constructed during the night. The station's engineering team had worked tirelessly to create a space large enough to accommodate Elder Pyraxis and the 3 trials, complete with obstacles for the flight test, a small ecosystem for the hunting trial, and a ceremonial fire pit for the final challenge. Elena's hands shook as she ran final diagnostic checks on the monitoring equipment. She had barely slept, spending the night researching every piece of information available about dragon development and trial procedures. What she had learned hadn't been encouraging. Most dragon hatchlings failed their first formal trials, requiring multiple attempts over several months to develop the necessary skills. Storm, Frost, and Mist didn't have months. They had hours. "Elena," Dr. Kim approached quietly, carrying a steaming cup of synthy coffee. "You should eat something. You'll need your strength for whatever comes next." Elena accepted the cup gratefully, though she doubted she could keep anything down. The 3 hatchlings were still asleep in their habitat, curled together in a protective pile with Frost's wing draped over her smaller siblings. Elena had resisted the urge to wake them early. They would need all their rest for the challenges ahead. Elder Pyraxis arrived precisely at sunrise, his massive form casting long shadows across the testing arena. Behind him came 3 other dragons Elena didn't recognize, their scales gleaming in shades of deep blue, forest green, and midnight black. Official witnesses, Elena realized, here to ensure the trials were conducted according to ancient law. "Dr. Vasquez," Pyraxis rumbled as he settled into position. "Are the young prepared for examination?" Elena nodded, though her throat felt too tight to speak. She activated the habitat's communication system. "Storm, Frost, Mist. It's time." The 3 hatchlings emerged from their sleeping alcove with the fluid grace that was becoming their trademark. Despite their youth, they moved with an unconscious coordination that spoke to their strong sibling bond. Elena felt a surge of pride watching them, even as her heart ached with the knowledge of what lay ahead. Storm took the lead as they entered the testing arena, his pale blue eyes taking in the assembled dragons and the various obstacles that had been prepared. His neck frills flattened slightly at the sight of so many adult dragons, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he positioned himself protectively in front of his sisters and waited for instructions. "The first trial is that of the hunt," Pyraxis announced formally. "The young must demonstrate their ability to capture and subdue live prey, using only their natural abilities. No tools, no assistance, no prepared food sources." Elena's heart sank as a technician released a small flock of native Dracorian flutterbirds into the arena. The birds were quick and agile, designed by evolution to evade the hunting attempts of much larger predators. For dragon hatchlings who had never hunted anything more challenging than automated food dispensers, the task seemed impossible. Storm studied the fluttering birds with intense concentration, his head tilting as he tracked their movements. Elena could almost see his young mind working through the problem, analyzing flight patterns and looking for weaknesses. Frost and Mist flanked him, instinctively adopting hunting formation despite never being taught the proper techniques. What happened next would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The three hatchlings moved with sudden coordinated precision. Storm launched himself into the air, herding the birds toward a specific section of the arena. Frost positioned herself below, ready to intercept any birds that tried to escape downward. Mist, despite being the smallest and least physically capable, provided strategic support by creating noise and movement that further confused the prey. The hunt lasted less than 3 minutes. Storm's powerful wings and surprising agility allowed him to corner one of the larger birds against the arena wall. His claws closed around the flutterbird with careful precision, subduing it without causing serious injury. The display of restraint impressed even the witnessing dragons, whose golden eyes reflected grudging respect. "Acceptable," Paraxis rumbled, though Elena detected a note of surprise in his voice. The hunting instinct remained strong despite artificial feeding. The second trial begins now. The flight test proved more challenging. A complex course had been constructed using crystalline formations and energy barriers that required precise aerial maneuvering to navigate successfully. Storm, with his larger wingspan and more developed muscles, completed the course with relative ease, his pale scales glinting as he wove through the obstacles with growing confidence. Frost managed the first half of the course successfully, but her slightly shorter wings made the tighter turns difficult. She clipped one of the energy barriers with her wingtip, sending shooting pains through her nervous system and causing her to spiral toward the ground. Elena bit back a cry of alarm as the young dragon fought to regain control, finally managing a somewhat graceless landing near the finish line. Mist, the smallest and most delicate of the three, approached the course with visible trepidation. Her flying skills were the least developed, and several of the obstacles seemed impossibly large for her tiny frame. Elena watched in agony as the little dragon attempted the first section, her wings beating frantically as she struggled to maintain altitude. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of trying to power through the course using brute strength like her siblings, Mist began using the air currents created by the energy barriers themselves. She rode the thermal updrafts and pressure differentials with an instinctive understanding of aerodynamics that left the adult dragons muttering in amazement. Her approach was unconventional, but undeniably effective. When all three hatchlings had completed the flight test, Elena felt a surge of hope. They had passed 2 of the 3 trials, demonstrating abilities that even she hadn't realized they possessed. Maybe, just maybe, they could succeed. Then Paraxis announced the final trial and Elena's hope crumbled. "The trial of flame," the elder dragon intoned. "Each young must ignite the ceremonial fire using only their breath. This is the most fundamental test of draconic identity. Without flame, a dragon is merely a large lizard with wings." Elena watched in horror as the ceremonial fire pit was prepared. She knew from her research that dragon fire breath was controlled by specialized organs that didn't fully develop until the hatchlings were at least 6 months old. Storm, Frost, and Mist were barely 3 months old. Their flame sacs were underdeveloped, their chemical production systems still immature. Storm approached the fire pit first, his pale eyes reflecting determination and growing desperation. He drew in a deep breath, his chest swelling as he attempted to produce flame. Elena could see the strain on his young features as he forced air through underdeveloped organs. Trying to ignite chemicals that weren't quite ready to burn, a small puff of superheated air emerged from his mouth, barely enough to warm the ceremonial kindling. It wasn't flame, and everyone present knew it. Frost tried next, her approach more methodical. She had observed Storm's technique and attempted to modify it, drawing multiple small breaths instead of one large one. The result was slightly better, a few sparks and wisps of smoke, but still not the steady flame required to ignite the ceremonial wood. Finally, little Mist approached the pit. She was trembling now, overwhelmed by the pressure and the knowledge that failure meant death for all 3 of them. Elena wanted desperately to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but the trial rules forbade any intervention. Mist drew in a breath that seemed too large for her delicate frame. She held it for a long moment, her pale scales shimmering with effort. When she finally exhaled, the result was barely visible. a tiny wisp of heated air that wouldn't have lit a candle, much less a ceremonial fire. The silence in the arena was deafening. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as the reality of the situation hit her. Despite their intelligence, their adaptability, and their remarkable bond with humans, the hatchlings had failed the most fundamental test of dragon identity. According to ancient law, they would now be declared unfit for survival. "The trials are concluded," Pyraxis announced, his ancient voice heavy with formal authority. "The young have failed to demonstrate the flame that marks them as true dragons. According to the laws of our people—" "Wait," Elena interrupted, her voice cutting through the formal proceedings like a blade. Every dragon in the arena turned to stare at her, their golden eyes reflecting shock at her audacity. No non-dragon had ever interrupted a formal trial proceeding. "Dr. Vasquez," Pyraxis rumbled warningly, "you are not permitted to interfere with the judgment." "I'm not interfering," Elena said, her voice growing stronger as desperation fueled her courage. "I'm invoking the right of alternative demonstration. It's an ancient provision in your own laws. If the traditional test fails due to developmental issues beyond the subject's control, an alternative demonstration of the same principle may be permitted." Pyraxis's massive head tilted as he considered her words. "You speak of laws written before your species discovered fire, human. How do you know of such provisions?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "Because I've spent the last 3 months studying everything." The testing arena fell silent as Elena's words hung in the air, like a challenge to thousands of years of dragon tradition. Elder Pyraxis studied her with ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, weighing her request against the immutable laws of his people. "The right of alternative demonstration has not been invoked in over 3 centuries, Pyraxis rumbled slowly. The last case involved a young dragon who had lost his flame organs to disease, but demonstrated his fire spirit through acts of courage in battle. What you propose? This is unprecedented." Elena felt the weight of impossibility pressing down on her shoulders, but she refused to let it show. Behind her, storm, frost, and mist huddled together, their pale eyes reflecting confusion and fear. They couldn't understand the legal complexities being discussed, but they could sense that their very existence hung in the balance. "Sometimes unprecedented situations require unprecedented solutions," Elena replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "These hatchlings have already proven they can adapt, learn, and form bonds that your own experts claimed were impossible. Let them show you what they've truly learned." The witness dragons shifted restlessly, their massive forms creating a symphony of creaking scales and rustling wings. This was clearly not how they had expected the trial to proceed. One of them, the midnight black dragon Elena had noticed earlier, spoke up in the harmonic tones of formal dragon. "Elder Pyraxis, this human speaks of demonstrations without specificity. How can we judge the validity of an alternative that has not been clearly defined?" Elena's mind raced as she realized she needed to propose something concrete, something that would satisfy the ancient requirements while playing to the hatchlings' unique strengths. Then, as she watched Little Mist comfort her siblings with gentle crooning sounds, inspiration struck. "Fire represents more than destruction," Elena said, addressing all the assembled dragons. "In your oldest texts, flame is described as the force that brings communities together, that creates light in darkness, that transforms raw materials into something greater. These hatchlings may not be able to produce physical fire yet, but they can demonstrate the essence of what fire represents." Elder Pyraxis leaned forward, his massive head lowering until Elena could see her own reflection in his golden eyes. "Elaborate, Dr. Vasquez. What specific demonstration do you propose?" Elena took a deep breath and gestured toward the 3 hatchlings. "Give them a challenge that requires the same qualities that flame represents. Community building, creative problem-solving, and the ability to bring light into darkness. Let them work together to solve something that would be impossible for any of them alone." The arena buzzed with whispered conversations as the witness dragons considered this unprecedented request. Elena could see some nodding thoughtfully, while others appeared skeptical. Everything depended on Pyraxis's judgment, and the ancient elder showed no emotion as he deliberated. "Very well," Pyraxis announced finally. "I will permit an alternative demonstration, but it must meet specific criteria. The young must solve a problem that requires not only cooperation, but also the essential dragon traits of intelligence, courage, and the ability to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Elena felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by the realization that she had no idea what challenge Paraxis might devise. The elder dragon was already communicating with the other witnesses in rapid harmonic tones, their conversation too complex for her universal translator to follow. After several minutes of discussion, Paraxis turned his attention back to the hatchlings. "Young ones," he called in Draconic, "approach and hear your final trial." Storm, Frost, and Mist moved forward with careful synchronization, their pale scales shimmering with nervous energy. Elena noticed that they had unconsciously arranged themselves in the same formation they had used during the hunting trial, with Storm in the lead and the two females providing support on either flank. "Before you lies a test of wisdom and cooperation," Paraxis explained, gesturing with one massive claw toward a section of the arena that Elena hadn't noticed before. "Hidden within this space are three objects that, when brought together, will activate a beacon of light visible throughout this system. However, the objects are concealed by puzzles that cannot be solved by strength alone." Elena watched as force fields shimmered to life, revealing a complex three-dimensional maze suspended in mid-air. The structure was beautiful and terrifying, composed of crystalline passages that shifted and rearranged themselves every few seconds. Scattered throughout the maze were what appeared to be energy barriers, pressure plates, and other mechanisms that would require careful coordination to navigate. "Each of you must retrieve one object," Paraxis continued, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "But the maze responds to the presence of multiple individuals. Actions taken by one affect the paths available to the others. You must work as one mind in three bodies to succeed." Elena's breath caught as she realized the elegance of the test. It wasn't just measuring the hatchlings' individual abilities, but their capacity to function as a unified pack, despite their unusual circumstances. More importantly, it was testing the very qualities that had made their bond with her so remarkable: their ability to communicate, adapt, and support each other. The hatchlings approached the maze entrance cautiously, their heads tilted as they studied the shifting crystalline passages. Elena could see them processing the challenge, their young minds working to understand the complex relationships between the various mechanisms. Then Mist did something that made Elena's heart swell with pride. The smallest hatchling began making a series of soft chittering sounds, not the random vocalizations of a confused baby, but a deliberate pattern that Elena recognized as the communication system the three had developed during their time at the research station. Storm and Frost responded immediately, their own vocalizations weaving together in a complex harmony that spoke of deep understanding and shared purpose. "They're planning," Elena whispered to Dr. Kim, who had been watching the proceedings with fascination. "They've developed their own language." The witness dragons had noticed it too. Elena could see them leaning forward, their golden eyes bright with interest as they observed the albino hatchling's unprecedented coordination. Storm entered the maze first, his larger size and strength making him the natural choice for triggering the heavier pressure plates. But instead of charging forward recklessly, he moved with careful precision, pausing frequently to communicate with his sisters through their complex sound pattern system. Frost took the middle route, her balanced proportions allowing her to navigate the narrower passages that Storm couldn't access. She demonstrated remarkable problem-solving skills, using her claws to manipulate crystalline switches that altered the maze's configuration in ways that created new paths for her siblings. Mist, despite being the smallest, proved to be the most crucial member of the team. Her delicate build allowed her to access the highest levels of the maze, where she could observe the overall pattern and relay critical information to Storm and Frost through their shared communication system. Elena watched in amazement as the three hatchlings moved through the shifting maze with increasing confidence. They were learning and adapting in real time, their bond allowing them to function as extensions of each other rather than separate individuals competing for success. When Storm reached his target, a glowing crystal sphere embedded in what appeared to be solid wall, he didn't simply try to extract it by force. Instead, he waited, maintaining contact with his sisters through continuous soft vocalizations. Only when Frost had maneuvered into position near her own target did he begin the delicate process of removing the sphere from its housing. The maze responded to his actions by shifting dramatically. But Frost was ready. She triggered a sequence of switches that stabilized the structure just long enough for Mist to reach her own target, in the maze's highest level. The coordination required was breathtaking, demonstrating a level of teamwork that Elena had never seen before in creatures so young. As the 3 hatchlings emerged from the maze, each carrying their glowing spheres, the entire arena held its breath. The test wasn't over yet. They still needed to bring the 3 objects together to activate the beacon that would prove their success. But Elena was no longer worried. Watching Storm, Frost, and Mist work together with such perfect harmony, she knew they would find a way. They had already proven something far more important than their ability to produce flame. They had proven that sometimes, the strongest bonds are forged not by biology or tradition, but by love, trust, and the courage to protect those who matter most. As the 3 spheres were brought together and blazed to life with a light that could indeed be seen throughout the system, Elena realized that her unconventional family had just rewritten the very definition of what it meant to be a dragon. The beacon's brilliant light pierced the twilight sky of Dracoris Prime, visible to ships in orbit and settlements across 3 continents. In the testing arena, Elder Paraxis stared at the combined radiance of the 3 spheres with an expression that Elena couldn't quite interpret. The other witness dragons had fallen completely silent, their ancient minds processing what they had just witnessed. For several long minutes, the only sounds in the arena were the soft chittering conversations between Storm, Frost, and Mist as they celebrated their success. The 3 hatchlings had positioned themselves in a protective triangle around the blazing beacon, their pale scales reflecting the light like prisms, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the crystalline walls. Finally, Elder Paraxis spoke, his voice carrying a weight of authority that had shaped galactic policy for centuries. In 800 years of life, I have never witnessed such coordination between dragon young who have not been formally trained in pack dynamics. These hatchlings have demonstrated something that our traditional teachings claimed was impossible. Elena felt her legs go weak with relief, but she forced herself to remain standing. The trial wasn't officially over until Paraxis rendered his formal judgment. The midnight black witness dragon shifted restlessly. Elder, while their cooperation is impressive, they still failed the fundamental test of flame production. Ancient law is clear on this matter. Ancient law, Paraxis replied thoughtfully, was written when our understanding of what constitutes dragon identity was more limited. Today we have seen something new emerge, something that may represent an evolution rather than a deviation from our traditions. Elena watched as Elder Paraxis approached the 3 hatchlings. Storm stepped protectively in front of his sisters. But instead of the aggressive posture Elena expected, he performed a complex series of movements that she recognized as a formal greeting in dragon culture. Where had he learned that? Elena wondered. Then she realized that the hatchlings were accessing genetic memories at an accelerated rate, their unusual circumstances forcing rapid development of instinctive behaviors. You have created something remarkable, Dr. Vasquez, Paraxis said, his golden eyes finding Elena's. These young have formed a pack bond not only with each other but with you as their guide and protector. In our language there is a word for this, Talith. It means family of choice, and it is considered the strongest of all bonds. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as the full implications of Paraxis's words sank in. The hatchlings weren't just being accepted. They were being recognized as having achieved something that even adult dragons rarely accomplished. However, Paraxis continued, and Elena's heart clenched with renewed anxiety, there remains the matter of their physical development. They are still young, still growing, still learning to master their natural abilities. They will require continued guidance and protection during their vulnerable years. The forest green witness dragon spoke up. Surely they belong with their own kind, Elder. The Crimson Flame Pack may have abandoned them, but other clans might accept them now that they have proven their worth. Elena bit back a protest. She had known this moment might come, when the hatchlings would be taken away to be raised by their own species. The logical part of her mind acknowledged that it might be better for them in the long run, but her heart rebelled against the idea of losing the 3 beings who had become her entire world. That would be traditional, Paraxis agreed. But these are not traditional circumstances. These young have bonded with a human in ways that our science cannot fully explain. Separating them now might cause psychological damage that could affect their development for centuries to come. Mist suddenly broke away from her siblings and approached Elena, her pale eyes bright with intelligence. She made the soft crooning sound that Elena had learned meant contentment and safety, then gently butted her massive head against Elena's chest. "Elena, friend," Mist said clearly in Standard Galactic, her pronunciation much improved from her earlier attempts. "Stay with Elena, friend." Pack bond strong. Storm and Frost quickly joined their sister, pressing close to Elena and adding their own vocalizations of agreement. The message was unmistakable. They wanted to stay with their chosen human family member. Pyraxis observed this display with fascination. Remarkable. They have not only learned to communicate in multiple languages, but have made a conscious choice about their living arrangements. This demonstrates cognitive development far in advance of their physical age. Elena knelt down and wrapped her arms around the three hatchlings as much as their size would allow. "I want what's best for them," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "If they would be happier with their own kind." "They have chosen their kind," Pyraxis interrupted gently. "And their kind includes you." The elder dragon was quiet for another long moment, his ancient mind weighing possibilities that could reshape dragon society. When he finally spoke, his words carried the force of law. "By the authority vested in me by the Golden Scale Alliance and in recognition of their successful completion of the trials, I declare Storm, Frost, and Mist to be full members of Dragon Society with all rights and protections therein. Furthermore, I recognize their chosen pack bond with Dr. Elena Vasquez and grant her the status of honorary pack elder with all responsibilities for their continued care and development." Elena gasped. Honorary Pack Elder was a title that had never been granted to a non-dragon in recorded history. It gave her legal standing to make decisions about the hatchlings' welfare and protection under galactic law. "But," Pyraxis continued, and Elena tensed again, "this arrangement must be monitored and evaluated as the young mature. Dr. Vasquez, you will report quarterly to the Dragon Council on their development progress. Any signs that this unconventional arrangement is hindering their growth will require immediate reevaluation." Elena nodded eagerly. "Of course, Elder. I understand the responsibility you're placing in my hands." "Do you?" Pyraxis asked, his golden eyes boring into hers. "These three will grow to be among the largest and most powerful creatures in known space. They will live for millennia, accumulate vast knowledge, and wield influence that shapes galactic civilization. You are committing not just to raising children, Dr. Vasquez, but to guiding the development of future leaders." The weight of those words settled on Elena's shoulders like a mantle of destiny. She looked down at Storm, Frost, and Mist, who were gazing up at her with complete trust and affection, and realized that her life had just taken a turn that she could never have imagined. "I understand," she said firmly, "and I accept the responsibility." Pyraxis nodded approvingly. "Then let this day mark the beginning of a new chapter in dragon history. Let it be recorded that family bonds transcend species, that love can overcome tradition, and that sometimes the abandoned become the foundation for something entirely new." As the witness dragons began the formal procedures for documenting this unprecedented ruling, Elena found herself surrounded by her three magnificent charges. Storm had draped his wing protectively over her shoulders, while Frost and Mist pressed close on either side, their purring creating a harmony that vibrated through Elena's bones. "What happens now?" Dr. Kim asked, approaching the group with a mixture of awe and practical concern. Elena smiled, feeling a sense of completion she had never experienced before. "Now we go home and figure out how to raise 3 dragon children, who are going to need bigger bedrooms very soon." Storm chittered what sounded suspiciously like laughter, while Frost began investigating Dr. Kim's pockets for anything interesting to add to her collection of treasures. Mist, meanwhile, had discovered that the beacon's light created fascinating shadows when filtered through her wing membranes. Looking up at the stars beginning to appear in Dracoris Prime's darkening sky, Elena realized that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, bureaucratic hurdles, and the constant responsibility of guiding 3 incredibly powerful beings as they grew into their full potential, but she had already proven that humans could do the impossible when it came to caring for abandoned dragon young. Whatever came next, she would face it with her unconventional family at her side. After all, the strongest pack bonds weren't forged by blood or tradition. They were forged by love, trust, and the courage to stand together against anyone who tried to tear them apart. The galaxy would never be the same.